Hidden behind steel doors lie the greatest stories the auto world forgot. From factory wars to near-death legends, this is Vaulted Wheels, unlocking the machines that built America.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a real mystery. We are going to look at the story of a revolutionary supercar that was literally built to define the future, but instead, it met a violent, fiery end. We'll explore how one of the most brilliant, entirely one-of-a-kind vehicles ever engineered was reduced to ashes, and why its ghost still haunts the automotive world today. So, grab your notebooks, get focused, and let's unravel the story of the Charred Ghost, Porsche's forgotten revolution. Okay, let's set this scene here. Imagine you're walking through the pristine, perfectly polished halls of the Italdesign Museum in Turin, Italy. You're surrounded by immaculate concept cars, right? But then you suddenly come across something that looks completely out of place. Sitting right there on a pedestal is a vehicle that genuinely looks like an active crime scene. It isn't restored, it isn't shiny, it's just a blackened skeleton of melted steel and shattered dreams. This is what's left of the 1970 Porsche Tapiro. And to figure out how a multi-million-dollar masterpiece ended up like this, we have to rewind the clock a bit.
That brings us to part one, the wedge revolution.
So flashback to the year 1970. At the time, the automotive world was absolutely obsessed with curves. Cars were soft, they were bulbous, they were flowing, but a young, brilliant Italian designer named Giorgetto Giugiaro had this wildly impossible idea. He wanted to shatter that status quo completely. He introduced a philosophy he called folded paper design, or the inclined plane. Basically, this was a radical styling shift that totally tossed out automotive softness, replacing it with sharp lines, aggressive wedges, and these super pronounced corners. He applied this extreme philosophy to a brand new concept car and named it the Tapiro. Why Tapiro? Well, because its razor-sharp slanted nose kind of looked like a tapir. You know, that elusive, sloping snouted animal from the rainforest.
Now, what's really staggering here is the sheer power hiding under all that folded paper. I mean, this wasn't just some design study made out of clay. Italdesign actually partnered with Porsche and Volkswagen, using a stretched Porsche 914/6 chassis. But they definitely didn't stop there. They handed the 2.4-liter flat-six Porsche engine over to Italian racing champion Ennio Bonamelli, and he tuned that thing to pump out a massive 220 horsepower at a screaming 7,800 RPM. And you've got to remember, back in 1970, in a car this light, 220 horsepower was absolute rocket ship territory.
Let's break down exactly what that power meant on the road. Because again, this wasn't a static model meant to just collect dust on a showroom floor somewhere. It was a fully functional, road-legal beast. That mid-mounted engine pushed the Tapiro to a top speed of 152 miles per hour. That meant this sharp-edged wedge was directly rivaling the performance of the fastest Ferrari production cars of the era, like the 365 GT. It was seriously fast.
And we really need to look at the exotic mechanics that set it apart, specifically the doors. Giugiaro designed what he called seagull wing doors, but he didn't just use 2 of them, he used 4. First, the front gull-wing glass panels opened up for the driver and passenger. Then, the rear gull-wing panels opened to reveal the luggage compartment and that beautifully tuned mid-mounted engine. To actually make all that work without the car falling apart, Giugiaro engineered this central cross steel structure. It acted longitudinally as the hinge spine for all 4 doors, and then transversely as a high-strength safety roll bar. It literally made the car a rolling sculpture of perfect symmetry.
Which leads us into part 2, a Porsche anomaly. So, here's the million-dollar question. If this car was so brilliant, and so fast, and so perfectly engineered, why on earth aren't our roads filled with wedge-shaped Porsches today? Why did this just become a one-of-a-kind ghost? Well, to answer that, we just have to look at the traditional Porsche aesthetic. Just contrast the Tapiro's sharp, aggressive angles with the soft, curvy silhouette you see right here. This is what Porsche purists absolutely adored. The brand's entire identity was built around those sensual, flowing lines. And this perfectly illustrates the conflict they were dealing with. On one side, you have the Porsche 911. That's the tradition, right? Soft curves, a rear engine layout, guaranteed brand continuity. On the other side, you have the Tapiro, the rebel, sharp wedges, a mid-engine layout, extreme angles. Giugiaro desperately wanted a mass-produced joint venture between Volkswagen and Porsche. But ultimately, the corporate leaders took one look at this extreme wedge and deemed it entirely too risky for commercial success. It was simply too much of a shock to their DNA.
Moving on to part 3, the daily-driven supercar.
Since the factory rejected it, the Tapiro had to find a life outside of Stuttgart.
And this builds into one of the most surprising and honestly awesome chapters in automotive history. After stunning everyone at the Turin Motor Show in 1970 and hitting the US at the LA Auto Show in '71, the car was sold into private hands in 1972. A wealthy Spanish industrialist and composer named Waldo de los Rios bought it. And here's the detail I absolutely love. He didn't lock this priceless spaceship away in some climate-controlled vault. Throughout the 1970s, he actually used it as his daily commuter car. Just imagine seeing this four-gull-wing wedge-shaped UFO picking up groceries on the streets of Madrid. It's wild.
But that takes us to part 4, Fire and Mystery.
Because, as the 1980s dawned, that daily commute ended in a sudden, violent catastrophe. The car that was supposed to be the future was reduced to that blackened skeleton we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. I want you to play detective with me for a second here. What actually caused the fire that destroyed the Tapiro? Historians have debated this for decades, and the sources leave us with a totally unsolved puzzle.
Let's impartially break down the 3 main theories floating around out there. Theory 1 is the labor bomb. Some sources claim that labor activists who were protesting the owner's business policies actually planted explosives under the chassis. Theory 2 is the tragic crash. Other accounts state it was just a really severe traffic accident in Madrid that sparked a catastrophic blaze. And then there's Theory 3, the irony of engineering. We already know the 914-6 chassis struggled with heat dissipation, so it's highly likely that the high-performance fuel lines, or maybe the Weber carburetors, cracked under the intense heat, spraying raw gas right onto a red-hot, tuned engine block. If that's true, the car's own incredibly tuned heart literally consumed it.
Finally, part 5, an immortal legacy.
Now, while the Tapiro itself was destroyed, the story doesn't just end in the ashes. Years later, Italdesign managed to track down the burned remains, and they bought them back. They had the original blueprints, they had the engineers, they could have easily rebuilt it to look brand new. But Giugiaro made this really profound artistic choice. He decided to reclaim the wreck and leave it completely unrestored. He placed it on a museum pedestal exactly as it was found, basically embracing the beauty of its scars. He left it as a rolling sculpture of preservation, and it stands today as this haunting physical reminder that even the most advanced ideas are incredibly fragile.
So why does this matter to you today? Well, because while the physical Tapiro died, its folded paper DNA survived and totally changed the world. Just look at this list. A few years after the Tapiro, an American executive named John DeLorean visited Giugiaro, and they used the Tapiro as a starting point to create the iconic DeLorean DMC-12. Yeah, the time machine from Back to the Future. The Tapiro's sharp angles also directly paved the way for the Maserati Boomerang, the Lotus Esprit, and the legendary Lamborghini Countach. The entire wedge era of supercars was born straight out of this Porsche's DNA.
I want to wrap up this explainer by leaving you with a bit of a provocative thought. If a $1 million vision of the future, a car that literally inspired the supercars on teenage bedroom posters for decades, can be so easily consumed by fire and forgotten, what fragile, brilliant ideas are we failing to protect today? Innovation requires preservation, and, sometimes the best lessons really do come from the ashes. Thank you so much for focusing in and diving into this mystery with me. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.